The house hummed, a disturbed hive of anticipation, buzzing with preparations for my 45th birthday. And despite everything, a fragile tendril of excitement unfurled within me. For weeks, Linda, my wife of over 2 decades, had been cultivating something grand. She'd dropped veiled hints of a surprise, one she claimed would shake me to my core, assuring me this birthday would be etched in my memory forever. Looking back, I realized she wasn't lying. Our life had settled into a semblance of stability, at least on the surface. Over the long years, we had built something solid, a comfortable home, a daughter now away at college, and a marriage that, while far from the passionate inferno of our youth, was functional enough. Chloe, our 19-year-old daughter, though mostly living away, had decided to come home for the weekend to help with the festivities. It was her idea to invite some of her friends over to decorate and prepare. I hadn't objected. Chloe's friends were frequent visitors, and I knew most of them. True, some of the boys struck me as overly loud and self-assured, especially Dylan. A perpetual smirk plastered his face, arousing an instinctive dislike within me. But he was young, and I chalked it up to youthful bravado. Linda and I, like any couple who had weathered 2 decades together, had our ebbs and flows. We were no longer the people who had once fallen so desperately in love, our life having drifted into the familiar currents of coexistence, living side by side, not together. I attributed it to the stresses of life, my long hours on construction sites and her dedication to her online business. We rarely argued, but we no longer shared the intimate conversations that had once bound us. Still, I could never have imagined the precipice towards which we were relentlessly hurtling. That Friday evening, the eve of the celebration, Chloe's friends arrived to help with the final touches. Opening the door, I was greeted by Dylan and 2 of his cronies, Eric and Jake, their grins radiating an unsettling sense of ownership. "Hey, Mr. Johnson," Dylan greeted me, flashing that infuriating smirk. "Ready for the best birthday of your life?" I forced a smile, suppressing the familiar wave of irritation that always accompanied this boy. "Yes, thanks for helping out," I said, stepping back to let them in. "Chloe's in the back, working on decorations. Go on through." They brushed past me, their laughter loud and their banter casual. A snippet of their conversation drifted back to me, Dylan's voice, as always, loud and confident. "Mrs. Johnson's still got it going on. Can't believe she—" I froze. My stomach clenched, blood rushing to my head. Were they talking about Linda, my wife? Before I could fully process the implication, Eric nudged Dylan with his elbow, whispering something I couldn't catch, and both erupted in laughter. My fists tightened. Every instinct screamed for me to barge into the room and wipe those smug looks off their faces, but I held back. Instead, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Just kids, I told myself. Stupid, immature kids, and yet, the disrespect. Was it directed at me? I waited until they were out of sight before heading into the kitchen, where Linda was busily preparing food for the next day. Approaching her, still simmering with a suppressed rage, I tried to keep my tone even. "You won't believe what I just overheard," I muttered, keeping my voice low. "Chloe's friends were talking about you, about how hot you are. Can you believe that?" Linda looked up, caught off guard. Her surprise quickly morphed into a dismissive smile. "Oh, for heaven's sake, they're just boys. They didn't mean anything by it." I shook my head, feeling the anger flare anew. "It's disrespectful, Linda. They're in our house talking about you like that. I don't want to hear it again." She sighed, lightly nudging my shoulder, attempting to diffuse the tension. "Relax, Mark. They're harmless." I didn't argue. Instead, I retreated, still unsettled but determined not to let it ruin the evening. I had more important things to focus on, like enjoying my own birthday. But a knot of unease tightened in the pit of my stomach, an inexplicable premonition. The next day, the house had transformed. Streamers draped from the ceilings, the air thick with the smoky aroma of barbecue, and laughter spilled from the backyard as guests arrived. The day unfolded perfectly. Linda was radiant, her smile dazzling as she effortlessly charmed everyone, as always. Chloe and her friends, Dylan, Eric, Jake, and a few others, weaved through the guests, helping and keeping the atmosphere buoyant. But a nagging feeling persisted within me, a sense that something was amiss. It wasn't just Dylan's knowing smirk, or the way he seemed to linger a little too close to Linda. There was a subtle tension in the air, a discordant note beneath the surface of the celebration. But I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, it was my birthday, and I was surrounded by loved ones. What could possibly go wrong? As evening began to paint the sky with hues of twilight, the party was in full swing. Toasts were made, laughter echoed, and food was devoured. I tried to soak in the moment, basking in the attention and the positive energy. But then something peculiar happened. Weaving through the crowd, I noticed Linda slip away from the guests and head back into the house, followed closely by Chloe's friends. I watched them until they disappeared down the hallway. The knot in my stomach tightened again. What on earth were they doing? My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. Linda and a gaggle of college kids, boys, heading upstairs towards our bedroom. I followed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs with each step. Reaching the door of our bedroom, I hesitated, a cold dread washing over me. Muffled voices drifted from within, punctuated by laughter and the distinct sound of furniture being moved. My mind conjured grotesque images. What could they possibly be doing in there? I stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The voices grew louder, more familiar. Linda's laughter joined theirs. And then it clicked. The unease wasn't paranoia. I was about to walk into something I wasn't prepared for. But there was no turning back. I reached for the door, ready to confront whatever lay beyond. I faltered for only a fraction of a second before making my decision. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound almost swallowed by the muffled voices and hushed laughter emanating from within. My heart hammered against my ribs, my throat suddenly dry. I stepped into the room, and the scene that greeted me stole the very air from my lungs. There they were, Dylan, Eric, Jake, and two other boys I didn't recognize. They were all surrounding her. Linda, my wife. She was naked, her body intertwined with theirs, these boys, the very boys who had helped decorate for my birthday. My mind refused to process the tableau unfolding before my eyes. I stood frozen in the doorway, numb with disbelief. They didn't even notice me at first. The room was thick with a nauseating cocktail of moans, giggles, and crude remarks. Their hands roamed her body with brazen familiarity, and Linda, my Linda, was laughing with them. The woman I had shared 20 years with, the mother of my child, utterly lost in this sick, twisted moment. I don't remember when I started to scream. Perhaps it was the precise instant the full weight of what I was witnessing crashed down upon me. Or maybe it was the raw, primal rage that had been simmering beneath the surface, finally erupting. All I know is that a guttural roar tore from my throat, shaking the very foundations of the room. "What the hell are you doing?" Everything seemed to stop at once. Linda whirled around, her smile vanishing, replaced by a mask of shock. The boys recoiled, startled by my sudden intrusion. A silence descended, brief and terrible, before the room exploded into chaos. I wasn't thinking. I couldn't think. All I knew was that I needed to destroy something, to unleash the fury that was tearing my world to shreds upon those who had shattered it. My hand grasped the first thing it could find, the old, heavy rotary phone that had sat gathering dust on the bedside table for years. With a primal scream, I swung it at the nearest body, Dylan. The sickening thud of plastic against bone was unmistakable. Dylan staggered back, clutching his head, a yelp of pain escaping his lips. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by wide, terrified eyes. "You bastards!" I roared, swinging the phone again, this time at Jake, who barely managed to duck out of the way. The room descended into a maelstrom of violence. They screamed, scrambling to get away, but I was too fast. The rage, born of a betrayal so profound it had twisted me into something else, something monstrous, fueled my movements. I landed a blow on Eric's shoulder, sending him crashing against the wall. But before I could swing again, they regrouped. There were 5 of them against 1. Younger, stronger, and now enraged that their sordid secret had been exposed. Dylan recovered quickly, grabbing my arm before I could land another blow. Eric and Jake joined him, tackling me to the ground. The phone slipped from my grasp, and a barrage of fists rained down upon me. I fought back with every ounce of strength I possessed, flailing wildly, trying to break free. I managed to land one solid punch on one of the unfamiliar boys, hearing a satisfying crunch as my fist connected with his nose. Blood spurted, and he groaned, collapsing backward. But it was short-lived. The others quickly overwhelmed me, pinning me to the floor, twisting my arms behind my back. I tasted blood in my mouth, the metallic tang mixing with the sweat and fury that churned within me. Every cell in my body screamed in protest as they kicked and punched me. I felt something crack, maybe ribs, but I didn't care. The pain was nothing compared to the inferno of my rage. At some point, I managed to break free. I scrambled to my feet, staggering towards the door. My vision swam, my head throbbed, but pure instinct for survival propelled me forward. I had to get out before they finished me. I stumbled into the hallway, leaning against the wall for support, my body shaking violently. Behind me, in the bedroom, I could hear their shouts, but I didn't stop. I lurched down the stairs, gasping for breath, my chest heaving with each painful inhale. And then, the guests heard it. The commotion, the screams. People surged in from the backyard, their faces etched with confusion and alarm. I collapsed in the middle of the living room, blood dripping from my nose and mouth, my clothes torn, bruises already blossoming on my arms and torso. And then Chloe appeared. Her face was ashen as she took in the scene. She rushed to my side, her eyes wide with bewilderment and fear. "Dad! What happened? Are you okay?" She tried to help me up, but I could barely move. I opened my mouth to speak, to warn her, to tell her to stay away, but before I could utter a single word, her gaze lifted, and she saw. Standing at the top of the stairs, disheveled, flushed, and half-naked, was Linda. Behind her stood the same group of college boys, equally disarrayed. Chloe's eyes widened in horror as the truth slammed into her like a runaway train. "Mom?" Her voice trembled, disbelief warring with disgust. "What the hell is going on?" Linda froze at the foot of the stairs, her face draining of all color as the reality of the situation crashed down upon her. She looked at Chloe, then at me, as if searching for an explanation. But there were no words. The damage was irreparable. A deathly silence descended upon the room, the air thick with shock and disbelief. Slowly, the guests began to comprehend the horrifying tableau before them. All eyes were fixed on Linda, my wife, standing there with a gaggle of half-dressed boys who were barely older than our daughter. Chloe's gaze darted between me and her mother, her face contorting with a mixture of confusion and fury. "Dad! What? Why are you—" she began, but her voice cracked as the full, sickening truth of what she was witnessing overwhelmed her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she stumbled back, shaking her head in disbelief. "Mom, what have you done?" I had no strength left for words, for explanations. All I could do was stare. My body ached, my world crumbling in slow motion. The whispers among the guests grew louder. People murmured, trying to make sense of the catastrophe unfolding before their eyes. And then, someone finally spoke. "Mark, what in God's name is happening?" one of my friends asked, his voice a mixture of concern and bewilderment. I forced myself to sit up, gasping for breath, wiping the blood from my face. "Call the police," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "Just call the police." The room erupted in a flurry of movement as people fumbled for their phones. But all I could do was sit there, amidst the wreckage of my life, and watch. Linda stood motionless, her eyes darting between Chloe and me. The enormity of her actions finally seemed to be dawning on her. I turned to her, my voice raw with pain. "It's over, Linda. We're done." Her face twisted, not with shame or remorse, but with a chilling fury. Fury. You son of a bitch," she hissed, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're nothing without me. Nothing." I had no response. No fight left in me. My body was broken, and everything I had once believed in was shattered. All I could do was watch the chaos swirl around us and wait for the end of this nightmare. In the aftermath of the night's cataclysm, a palpable shock hung heavy in the air. The entire house seemed frozen, as if time itself had ceased for everyone within its walls. I pushed myself up from the floor, every muscle screaming in protest, my head throbbing with the dull ache of the blows I had sustained. The guests stared at me with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity, their whispers a low, unsettling hum. They didn't know what to do. How could they? No one expects to witness something so grotesque and unimaginable at a birthday celebration. Their gazes, a toxic blend of pity, disgust, and bewilderment, pierced my soul like daggers. But none of it mattered. I had to do what needed to be done. "Everyone, out!" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. But then, the rage, still smoldering deep within, reignited, and I found a sliver of strength. "Get out!" They scattered like startled birds, grabbing their belongings, their faces pale with shock. Some mumbled apologies, others avoided eye contact. But I didn't care. I didn't want their pity. I just wanted them gone. The fewer witnesses to this humiliation, the better. As the last of the guests scurried out of the house, I slammed the door shut, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, trying to catch my breath. My body ached from the beating, my ribs burned, and my vision still swam from the blows to my head. But none of that physical pain could compare to the agony tearing me apart inside. The realization that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, had just annihilated everything. She had destroyed us. I turned to Linda. She hadn't moved from the foot of the stairs, still standing there, barely covered, her face a grotesque mask of fear and fury. Behind her, frozen in her own private hell, stood Chloe, tears streaming down her face. My heart twisted at the sight of my daughter, forced to witness her mother's unimaginable betrayal. She shouldn't have seen this. None of this should have happened. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice now firm, the shock giving way to a cold, hard anger. "You... what?" Linda spat, taking a step forward, her face contorted with disbelief and rage. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark. Don't make this any worse than it already is." "Worse?" A raw, bitter laugh scraped its way out of my throat. "Worse, Linda. You've destroyed everything. You let those kids do that to you in our own home. It's over. We're done." My voice cracked, but I forced myself to stand tall, despite the pain that lanced through my body. Linda's face shifted from shock to something darker, something cold and calculating. She crossed her arms over her chest and sneered. "You think you can just throw me out? You think you have that kind of power? You're pathetic, Mark. You've always been pathetic." I couldn't believe my ears. Even after everything, after what she had done, she stood there, furious at me. I didn't know this woman anymore. The wife I thought I knew had been replaced by someone else entirely, someone I no longer recognized. Ignoring her, I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and dialed the police. Chloe just stood there, numb, unable to fully grasp the depth of her mother's betrayal. As I waited for the line to connect, Linda watched me with cold, assessing eyes. The police arrived quickly, The officers who entered the house, their faces grim as they took in the sight of me, beaten, bloodied, and barely standing. In a cold, detached voice, I explained everything, recounting what I had seen upstairs, the assault, the sickening betrayal that had unfolded before my eyes. I watched as they took notes, their expressions darkening, their gazes flicking between me, Linda, and the group of college boys still milling around like deer caught in headlights. The boys were taken into custody without much resistance. Dylan, of course, tried to put on a show, spitting out half-hearted insults as they cuffed him, but even he seemed to realize the jig was up. Linda stood silently to the side, arms crossed, glaring at me as if I were the villain in this sordid tale. She didn't even try to defend herself. No apologies, no explanations, just a cold, bitter stare as they led her away with the rest of them. Before Linda was escorted out the door, I met her gaze one last time. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice firm despite the ragged edges of pain in my chest. "We're done. You will never see me or Chloe again." For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps even regret. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of pure, incandescent hatred. "You're making a mistake, Mark," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're going to get away with this? You think you can just discard me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. You're finished, Mark. Do you hear me? You are nothing." The officers guided her out the door, and as I watched her go, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It was over. She was gone, and with her, all the lies, all the pretense, all the poison that had been festering in our marriage for God knows how long. Or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up battered and bruised, but resolute. I had barely slept that night, my mind a whirlwind of broken pieces, desperately trying to make sense of the shattered remnants of my life. Chloe had gone to stay with a friend, and I spent the night alone in my house. I was just starting to pull myself together when a loud banging echoed from the front door. Then another, more insistent. I dragged myself to my feet, still stiff and sore from the previous night's beating, and opened the door. Standing on my porch was a group of men, 5 or 6 of them, all built like brick walls, their faces rough and unfamiliar. They weren't from around here. I had never seen them before, but they weren't the kind of men you easily forgot. Their eyes were cold, predatory. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head and a nasty scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You Mark?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Yeah," I replied wearily, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Who the hell are you?" He grinned, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You've upset some people you shouldn't have, Mark." Before I could react, they were on me. The next few minutes blurred into a chaotic mess of fists and pain. They didn't pull any punches. The blows came fast and hard, knocking me to the ground within seconds. I tried to fight back, but I was already weakened, and these guys were professionals, thugs. I felt my ribs crack under their relentless assault, my vision swimming as they continued to pummel me. Each strike sent a wave of agony through my already battered body. I tasted blood, the world spun, but I refused to lose consciousness. Not like this. When they were finally done, they left me lying on the floor, gasping for air, every inch of my body screaming in protest. I could barely move, my limbs feeling like broken puppets. They stood over me, their faces grimly satisfied, before one of them knelt down beside me. "Consider this a warning," he said, his voice low and cold. "Stay away from Linda. You file for divorce, you talk to the cops, you even think about causing her any more trouble. We'll be back, and next time, you won't be so lucky." I barely registered his words as they turned and left, the door slamming shut behind them. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my body broken, my life in ruins. Linda had done this. She had connections, dangerous connections, and I had had no idea. I hadn't known who she really was. The house was silent after the thugs left, the echo of their threats still ringing in my ears. I lay on the cold floor for what felt like an eternity, each breath a painful reminder of my shattered ribs and the throbbing agony of my bruises. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation. Everything that had constituted my life had crumbled in the span of 2 days. My marriage, my reputation, and now my very safety. Linda, the woman I had spent 20 years with, wasn't just a cheat. She was involved with people who could have me killed if they wanted. I had no idea who she truly was, no idea the dark, secret life she had been hiding from me all these years. And now, I was paying the price. Eventually, I dragged myself to my feet, each movement sending sharp jolts of pain through my body. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what the hell I was supposed to do next. The police wouldn't help. This was deeper than just an affair gone wrong. Linda had connections, criminal connections. Whoever those thugs were, they had come to protect her, and she had sent them. She wasn't finished with me yet. And as much as I wanted to fight back, I needed more information. I needed to know who I was dealing with. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I had no other choice. I made the call the next morning, despite the fresh and throbbing bruises on my face and torso. My body was a wreck, but my mind was sharp with a burning rage and a desperate resolve. I wasn't going to sit back and let Linda destroy what little was left of my life. I needed answers, and I needed someone who could dig into the past I had been so blind to all these years. The detective's name was Harris, a grizzled, no-nonsense private investigator recommended by an old friend. When he showed up at my door, he took one look at me, his eyebrows shooting up at the sight of my bruises. "Looks like you've been through hell," he said, his voice raspy, stepping inside and surveying the wreckage of what had once been a home. I gave a dry, humorless laugh, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my fractured ribs. "You have no idea." We sat down, and I told him everything. The affair, the college boys, the beating, and the gang that had come to finish the job. I laid it all out, holding nothing back, even though each word felt like another dagger twisting in my chest. He listened intently, without interrupting, just nodding occasionally, making notes in a small, worn notepad. "So," he said when I finally finished, "you think your wife is involved with some dangerous people, and she sent them to make sure you don't pursue this?" I nodded. "They said they'd be back if I filed charges or went through with the divorce." Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his stubbled chin thoughtfully. "And you have no idea what she's gotten herself into? Nothing in her past that stands out? Anything at all?" "Nothing," I said, feeling like a complete fool. "I don't even know who the hell she is anymore." He sighed, pulling a pack of cigarettes from his coat pocket. "Well, looks like we've got some digging to do. I'll start by looking into her background, old records, contacts, anything that might give us a lead. But I'm warning you, Mark, if she's mixed up with serious criminals, this could get very ugly." I already knew it was ugly. I nodded again, too weary to argue. "Just do what you have to. I need to know." Days crawled by. I kept a low profile, wary of any further encounters with Linda's associates. Chloe still refused to come home, staying with her friend. She couldn't even look at me after what had happened, and I didn't blame her. Her mother had betrayed us both, and the shame was a heavy burden for her young shoulders to bear. Meanwhile, Harris worked in the shadows, piecing together the fragments of Linda's hidden life. It wasn't long before he uncovered what I had feared. Linda had a past, one that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. In her younger years, she had been involved with some shady characters, people who lived on the fringes of society, dealing in drugs, money laundering, God knows what else. She had seemed to settle down when we met, but it appeared those old ties had never truly been severed. "She's in deep, Mark," Harris told me over the phone one evening. "There's a lot buried in her past, but one thing's clear. She knows dangerous people. People who wouldn't hesitate to do a favor for an old friend, like sending a crew of thugs to rough you up. She's not just playing house anymore, Mark. She's gone back to the life she used to live. That was the final nail in the coffin. But then, things got even worse. Harris called me one afternoon with a new piece of information, something I hadn't expected. "Mark, you're not going to like this," he said, his voice unusually strained. "I've been tracking her movements, and it looks like she's drained a significant amount of money from your joint accounts. A substantial amount. She's gone." My stomach plummeted. I hadn't checked the accounts since the gang had attacked me. I had been too focused on just surviving this daily nightmare, and now she had taken the last vestige of my security, my financial stability. Linda had emptied the accounts and vanished, leaving me with nothing. "Do you know where she went?" I asked, my voice tight with panic. Harris hesitated. "I have a lead. She was seen heading into the woods on the outskirts of town. But there's something else. People are saying she's been meeting up with some old associates, possibly trying to score drugs. This isn't just about the money, Mark. She's desperate." We tracked her down that same evening, driving out to a remote, wooded area on the edge of town. It was a place I had never been before, an old, abandoned stretch of forest where no one would go unless they had something to hide. The trees loomed tall and ominous as we pulled up, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our tires. "Stay here," Harris said, gripping his camera tightly. "I'm going to get some pictures. We need evidence if we're going to use this against her." I nodded, remaining in the car as he crept into the woods, his silhouette disappearing among the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. Linda, my wife, the woman I thought I knew, was out there, doing God knows what. I felt sick to my stomach. Harris returned a few minutes later, his face grim. "She's in there with some guys. Looks like she's trying to score something. Drugs, maybe." I got it all on film. I stared out towards the woods, my breath catching in my throat. "What now?" "We get out of here," he said firmly. "We have enough. Let's go." As we started to drive away, a movement caught my eye in the trees. A shadow flickered, and then suddenly, she was there. Linda burst out of the tree line, her eyes wild and frantic, her clothes disheveled, her hair a tangled mess. She saw the car and lunged towards us, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "Mark, you bastard, come back! You can't leave me, Mark!" Her cry echoed through the trees as Harris slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car spitting gravel as it sped down the dirt track. I glanced back in the rearview mirror and saw her running after us, her figure shrinking with every increasing mile per hour. She kept running, kept screaming, until she was nothing more than a tiny speck on the horizon. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had spent 2 decades with, the woman I had shared my life with, had devolved into something unrecognizable. She wasn't just a liar and a cheat. She was a criminal, a person who had concealed a dark, twisted existence from me all this time. We drove in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had the evidence, enough to go to the police, enough to finally put an end to this nightmare. But as I sat there, staring out at the darkening sky, I couldn't shake the all-consuming sense of loss. My life was in ruins. Linda had torn everything to shreds, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to piece it back together. The silence in the car was deafening. The further we drove from the woods, the more distant everything seemed. The past, the years spent with Linda, the life I thought I knew. It was all slipping away like a bad dream, leaving behind a foul residue that clung to everything. The woman I had loved for over 20 years was gone. She had vanished long before I realized it, replaced by a stranger with secrets darker than I could have ever imagined. As Harris drove, I stared blankly out the window, trying to make sense of the chaos raging in my head. But there was no sense to be made. Not now. Maybe never. Linda had hidden so much from me, her past, her criminal connections, and now her addiction. All this time, I had thought our marriage was just going through a rough patch, that we were drifting apart like many long-term couples do. But the truth was far more sinister. She had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. Harris broke the silence, his voice gruff but steady. "We have enough evidence to put her away for a long time, Mark. The recording, the stolen money, the drugs. I'll take it all to the police, and they'll handle it. You don't have to worry about her anymore." I nodded, though the relief didn't come as easily as I thought it would. Yeah, you're right." But even as I said the words, a part of me still couldn't quite believe how far everything had spiraled. I had always imagined betrayal to be someone seeking solace in another's arms, a fleeting affair, a dalliance, something that hurt, but something that had some semblance of explanation. But this was something else entirely. This was the destruction of everything I believed in, everything I had built. Linda's lies had cut deep, and I wasn't sure if I would ever fully recover. The next morning, we handed over all the evidence to the police. Harris had everything: the recording of Linda's transaction in the woods, the drugs, the trail of stolen money from our joint accounts. There was no doubt that she was involved in something far more serious than a simple affair. The detectives we spoke to acted swiftly. They had seen it all before: people spiraling into the criminal underworld while their families remained blissfully unaware. Linda was no exception. By the evening, she was in custody. The police apprehended her at some rundown motel on the outskirts of town. They found enough drugs in her possession to charge her with intent to distribute. I sat in the living room, the house empty and echoing with silence, when one of the detectives called me. "She's in custody," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Looks like she's been using for a while, Mark. It wasn't just a small stash we found. She's in deep. I'm sorry." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected something like that, but hearing it confirmed was worse than I had imagined. Linda had been an addict all this time. While I was working late to keep us afloat, she had been sinking deeper and deeper into a life I knew nothing about. I hung up the phone and stared at the walls of the house we had built together. Everything felt hollow, as if the life I had been living was just an illusion, a house of cards that had collapsed in one brutal moment. The legal process moved quickly. Linda didn't stand a chance of fighting the charges. Between the drugs, the stolen money, and the damning evidence Harris had collected, she had nowhere to turn. She was going away for a long time. As for the boys, the ones who had been involved with her, the ones who had turned my birthday into a nightmare, they didn't get off scot-free either. The police charged them with contributing to the delinquency of an adult, though the brunt of the justice system came down on them in the form of hefty fines. They weren't innocent in all of this, but Linda was the true criminal. The court slapped them with exorbitant fines, enough to make them pay for their part in this twisted nightmare. Dylan, his smug smirk finally wiped clean, had nothing to say when he stood before the judge. Eric and Jake were equally silent. They were just scared kids who had gotten involved in something far beyond their comprehension. They didn't look so cocky anymore. As for Linda, she never showed any remorse. Not to me, at least. I didn't attend her hearings, didn't waste my time listening to whatever excuses she might have concocted for her actions. I didn't want to see her. The woman I knew was gone, and I had no interest in the stranger she had become. Weeks turned into months. The house felt unbearably empty, as if it no longer belonged to me. Chloe remained away, still staying with her friend, too shaken and hurt to deal with the aftermath of her mother's actions. I didn't blame her. I didn't know how to navigate the wreckage on my own. Some nights I would wander through the house, drifting from room to room, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything went wrong, but there were no answers, no tangible clues to explain the unraveling. My mind would drift back to the early years with Linda, when everything had felt so simple. We were young, in love, building a life together. I had thought we had it all figured out, but perhaps I had been fooling myself even then. There must have been signs, small, almost imperceptible cracks that I had chosen to ignore, dismissing them as normal marital bumps in the road. But now, looking back, I realized I had been blind to who she truly was. The day the divorce was finalized was the first day I felt a genuine sense of release. Linda was gone, legally and irrevocably, locked away and excised from my life. The paperwork was simple, almost disappointingly mundane. A few signatures, some legal formalities, and it was over, just like that. 20 years of marriage, shared memories, love, and betrayal reduced to a few sheets of paper. I walked out of the lawyer's office that day feeling lighter, though the weight of everything that had transpired still pressed down on me. This wasn't something you could just shake off. The damage was profound, and I knew it would take time to heal. But there was something else too, a flicker of hope, however small, that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. Sitting on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the trees, I finally allowed myself to breathe. This wasn't the end. There was a long road ahead, but I had survived the worst of it. Linda was gone, the lies were gone, and the crushing weight of her betrayal, though still present, no longer suffocated me. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Chloe would ever fully recover from the trauma her mother had inflicted, or if I would ever be able to trust anyone again. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of something akin to hope. A small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could piece my life back together.